Hey guys, I'm Ed Kimber. I'm a baker and cookbook author based in London, and today I thought I'd show you a classic British Easter treat, the hot cross bun. Now, this recipe is fairly classic, although I've made it vegan, and it's vegan because at the moment it was hard to get eggs, so this is just a simpler mix, but also is vegan if you have vegan friends or if you're vegan. So ingredient wise, it's very simple. I've got some spelt flour, again because normal flour was a little bit tricky to get hold of, but spelt works wonderfully and gives a nice flavour. Then we've got some fast action dried yeast, some light brown sugar, some spices and some salt, and then some plant-based milk. I'm using almond milk, and then some vegan butter. The vegan butter needs to be block style, it just makes a nicer textured dish. And then I'm using classic dried fruit, so I'm using raisins and sultanas. Now, in the recipe, the written recipe, this has got cranberries and pistachios. You can use those, no problem, but this is just a little bit more classic. So to start with, all we're going to do is add our flour to a large bowl. I'm using a stand mixer, but you can easily make this by hand, it's no problem. And then to that, we're going to add our fast action dried yeast. If you're using active dry yeast, you want to bloom that in our milk mixture first. And then to that, we're going to add our milk, and then our spices and our salt. I'm using cinnamon, mixed spice, which is kind of a real classic British sweet spice mix. And then I'm going to use some light brown sugar. And then to that, we're also going to add our vegan butter. Now I'm going to mix this for a couple of minutes just to bring everything to a shaggy dough. And the difference with using spelt dough is it doesn't like to be kneaded for a very long time. If you put it in the mixer for more than, say, 5 minutes, the gluten starts to deteriorate and break down. So unlike normal flour, this wants to be done on a minimum, just until it forms a nice dough and just seems a little bit elastic. So I left the dough in there for about 2 to 3 minutes. You can see it's got some stretch to it already, but we haven't overdone it, so we know that this should be okay. So now we just need to add our dry fruit to this. Now when it comes to the dried fruit, you've got a couple of different options. This fruit I've got is really nice and plump already, but we know that often it comes and it's super dry and hard, and we call it dead flies because it's kind of gross. So if your fruit is a little bit old, it's been in the back of the cupboard, what you can do is rehydrate it. Now you can do this with loads of different things. You can just soak it in hot water for 10 minutes or so and then drain out the excess at the end, and the fruit will have reabsorbed a lot of it. But you can do that with different liquids. So you can do it with alcohol, you could put some rum in these, that would be delicious. You could do some Earl Grey tea or any kind of black tea. A spice tea like a chai masala would be delicious. Anything you want to rehydrate it, but since mine are already nice and plump, I'm not going to bother. So I'm going to tip my fruit into the bowl and just very briefly knead this for 1 or 2 minutes just to combine everything. You can also just do this on the work surface with your hands, it's no problem. So your aim with adding the fruit isn't really trying to knead the dough any further, it's just trying to distribute this fruit evenly so that every bite gets some of the dried fruit. So once our fruit is nicely distributed, I'm just going to turn the dough out into a lightly greased bowl, and then we're going to cover that and let that sit for about an hour or so until it's about roughly doubled in size, and then we can get on with forming the actual buns. So you want to make sure that the buns are covered. I just use a clean tea towel, and then to prove them, I'm going to pop them inside my oven with the light on, just to create a little bit of ambient heat. Ignore my sourdough in the background, but that's just going to sit in there happily for about an hour. So it's been about an hour or so, just over. You can see our dough has nicely doubled, so we are now ready to shape our hot cross buns. You can do this with a scale or you can do it by eye, but basically we just need to divide them into 12 equal sized pieces. So at this point it's a good idea just to cover the buns we're not working on, because we don't want them to dry out. And then to form them into buns, there's a few things you can do. Easiest one is just to press them into a flat and then just fold the corners into the middle. That's a fine rough ball, but if you want, you can also put it on the surface and then just give it a little bit of pressure just to tighten up. You're not pushing down, you're just kind of rotating and making some tension as the ball tightens up and you get a neater finish. And we're just going to place them onto the tray. So when you are shaping the buns and putting them onto your tray, you need to make sure that we're just leaving a little bit of space between each one, because obviously they're a yeasted recipe, so they will expand as they rise and then bake. So once all your buns are nicely formed, all we're going to do is once again cover the tray, let them sit out at room temperature for about an hour or so until they've risen, they're puffy, and when you press them with your finger, they should leave an indent that springs back slowly but doesn't fill quite all the way in. If the indent stays in fully, then they're overproofed. If it springs back immediately, then they're underproofed. So now that it's been about an hour again, our buns have nice and doubled, they're touching, they're ready to bake. If you press them, they leave a little indent, but they spring back just a little bit. So what we're going to do now is glaze them and then pipe on our crust. Now because these are vegan, we can't use a traditional egg wash. So what I've done is I've taken some of our almond milk and I've just added a little bit of sugar and made a kind of syrup, and it will replicate a bit what an egg wash would do. It won't be as shiny, but it will give a little bit of browning. And then for the cross, all I've done is made a smooth but pipeable paste from the almond milk and some of our flour, just mixing the two together until you get a nice pipeable consistency. So all we're going to do is just brush a thin layer of our milk mixture all over the buns. So for the crust mixture, all I've done is I've put the paste mixture into a disposable piping bag, and then I'm just going to snip just a small hole on the end, and then we're going to pipe that across the buns. So just pipe a continuous line all the way down, not dragging too much because you don't want the line to rip, and then you're going to do the same on all of the buns. And then you do exactly the same thing across, so obviously to make the crust. If you don't want to use the paste, you don't have to, you can leave them off. They won't be that classic hot cross bun, but they'll still taste as good. Outside of the UK, some people in the US use custard on top, some use icing sugar, but this flour paste is the classic version. So then you're going to take the buns, you're going to put them in the oven for about 25 minutes until they're nicely browned. So now that our buns are out of the oven, they're really nice and golden brown. The one thing they don't have is that shine that we would traditionally think of with a hot cross bun, and that's partly because we didn't use the egg wash, but also because we have one final step. And all it is taking some apricot jam that we've just put in a pan with a tiny bit of water and then just brought to a simmer so it's nice and sticky. And then whilst the buns are still warm, just brush this all over. And then once the buns are cool, this will have a really nice sticky texture.